Hi, and welcome to an RPM Telco webinar. My name is Jackie Hun, and I'm going to be hosting this webinar. I work for RPM as the Customer Success Proactive Representative, and in this webinar today, we're going to be talking about agency users in general. So we're going to start by going over the agent user discussion, pretty much what an agency user is, enabling and disabling them, and then we're going to also be looking into things like transfer management, when you start setting up transfers to send commission data from your subscription to another subscription. You're kind of going to get a view of both the transfer management from the aspect of setting it up as well as receiving it a little bit at the end. And then we're going to go into things like agent user settings, what that is all about, the settings you can play with when it comes to your agent users, as well as how to use agency groups if you have a need for agency groups, what they are even. And then finally, we're going to end with agency assignments, which is kind of like a staff assignment, which is how you can kind of have your agent users create process forms and maybe manage it a little bit better. All right, jumping into the first topic here, we're going to be talking about what the agent user is. So in general, in RPM, an agent user is just any user that is created under an agency, and they need to be created under an agency and they can't be created anywhere else because they are part of the agency. So to kind of show you, I'm jumping into my RPM subscription here. And if I go to the top left menu into agencies, and just to note, your agencies might be named something else, as we will go over how to change that later on in the webinar. But if you have this name something else, just know that by default in RPM, it is called agencies. But you can change it to anything you would like to name your partners. So on this page here, we're going to be going into one of my agencies, and then we're going to be looking at the reps and managers listed on under the agencies. So these are what we consider agent users. Now, this box here can be moved around. So just so you know, if you click into an agency and you don't see this right away, it might be somewhere else on the page. But if you did want to move it around, you can do so just by clicking and dragging. It's a quick tidbit there. So reps and managers are two agent user types. An agent user can be both a rep and a manager at the same time, or they can just be a rep or just be a manager. And the difference between the two kind of user types for agent users is that reps, when they get assigned commission items, they can only see commission items assigned to themselves, whereas a manager user can see all of the commission items assigned to an agency. Now, this kind of comes into play more when you are doing things like adjustments and referrals, because those don't get assigned directly to a rep and they only get assigned to the agency as a whole. So if you're creating agents or agencies, and then you're going to want to create agent users to give your sale partners access to see their own commissions or things like that, that is one thing you're going to have to keep in mind, is the difference between reps and managers. Now, our recommendation in most cases is just to create a manager and rep user. So create one agent user that is both a rep and a manager. So you can both assign commission items to the rep version of that user. And then the manager login of that user can then see anything like adjustments or referrals if you get those in the future. But yeah, just so you know, if you did create an agency or an agent user with just that is just a rep, they can still be assigned commission items. There's like two ways to assign things in RPM, or assign commission items to an agent in RPM, that being the account assignment or using an assignment code. So when you go to do those assignments, the only user that shows up to assign to would be agencies and the agent users under those agencies that are reps. So the kind of the opposite thing that could happen is if you had a managed user that wasn't a rep, you might run into a situation where you can't assign commission items to this manager user because they need to be a rep to be assigned commissions. So that's generally a long way of saying you should have a rep and a manager user as one user on your agencies by default, or as a best practice. So other than that, you might be curious about like the billing consequences of having a user that is both a rep and a manager. RPM only counts the higher of the two, if that makes sense, higher of the two user types of managers typically. And you would only get charged for the manager user. So if you had both a rep and a manager, technically, if I click on this, for example, either the rep or the manager, it would take me to the user itself, and you'd notice that it has a rep tab and a manager tab. So when it comes to billing, RPM only takes the higher of the two. So in this case, manager, I was saying, and you would only get charged for the one user type. So you wouldn't get double billed for having both a rep and a manager that are the same user. You would only get charged for the manager user in this scenario. So yeah, so that's the basis of a agent user in RPM. The agent users can, or the main use for them at least, is to kind of get assigned commission items, have those calculations done, and then when you close your run, the agent user can log in and see the commissions that are assigned to them and their payouts and things like that. Some further uses are you can also open up your process side of RPM. So typically to house like opportunities or orders, you can open certain processes up to your agents so they can kind of see or work in your RPM to help you create certain forms. So things like commission inquiries, opportunities, orders, trouble tickets, things like that. You can give them a login, and when the agent has the login, they can go and create forms or view forms that are assigned to them and things like that. But yeah, so that's typically generally what the agent user use case is, and we're going to jump into our second topic here. All right, jumping back to the agenda here, we're going to be talking about our next topic, which is how to enable and disable your agent users and general management of them, and some tips and tricks that are going to make it a little easier to see what is turned on, what's turned off. And yeah, we're also going to be talking a little bit about transfers in this part as well. So yeah, jumping into my RPM subscription. So the first thing is I'm going to be covering the simplest way to turn off an agent user is just to go to the top left menu, go into your reps here. And if you know what user you want to turn off, it's very easy. You just find the list here of all of your rep users. You click on the rep user you want to disable, and then you'll be brought to their user page. Then you can just edit the sign in. And when you edit the sign in, you can just go enabled no, and then check this little box here at the bottom saying you confirm that the will be removed from your invoice on the next billing cycle. So some background on that is that RPM post bill, that when you disable a user, say you disable it middle of the month or at the beginning or even at the end, but say you disable it at some point in the month, that user will still count towards your active user count for the current month you're on. So say you disable it in February, when your February invoice comes at the end of the month, that user is still going to show up on your invoice. And that user will not drop off until the next month of March, where RPM has a kind of running tally of all of your enabled price points. So for the users in this scenario, it would see that, oh, that rep user is no longer on in this month, so you're not going to get billed for it at the end of the month. That's just what this warning is confirming here. You give that a check, you hit OK, and that's it. Your username or your user is disabled. In this case, there's just a funny quirk here with my LastPass that fills in a username, so it changed it. So I'm just going to cancel here. And yeah, so you'll notice this still says enabled is because I canceled that edit thing, and I don't actually want to disable my user. And it wasn't because LastPass stopped me from doing that. But yeah, so we hit the up arrow to go back to the view here. So that's the simplest way to disable a rep user. Very, very easy. But some more complicated things you can do is you can also go to the more menu. You can go import. And when you download this import reps, you'll just get an empty Excel file that will have all the columns you need. And all you have to do after downloading it is you could, for example, download your reps view here, and then you can just put it in your reps that you want disabled into that Excel file that you're going to get, and you can fill in for the sign in. You can go disabled, and that'll also disable them en masse. So you can disable a whole bunch of them at once, and you don't need to do them one at a time. Another thing that might help is on your reps page here, if you go to this view all and you give that a click, by default, depending on which RPM, kind of when you sign up with RPM, you might have this enabled manager and or reps view built into your subscription as a custom view. So if you give that a click, you can see that the sign-ins, it filters out all the disabled users and just shows you the ones that are enabled. So you can kind of see at a glance, oh, I have 9 enabled agent users on my system right now. And then you can go through them, disable them as you need to. But if you don't have this view, and let's say you went to you're still back on your all view, and you went to give this a click and you notice you don't have it, no problem, just hit add a view and we can just create it. So just go enabled rep users. I'm going to use a different name than the built-in one so I don't get an error. And then you can make it shared or private. There really isn't a difference. Private, there is a difference, but there's not a big difference for this scenario. Private just makes it so that only you can see the view. And if you do shared, then everyone that is a staff user in your RPM subscription can see it. So if you had multiple user logins, it's probably best to make this view shared so everyone can kind of see it. So we go shared, we hit OK, and then we just add a filter under info, and you just go sign in, and then you just check enabled, and that'll make sure it's all limited to enabled. So yeah, so another way you can do it is if you don't want to click through all those things, you can just type sign, and then you'll get this sign in option. You can add the filter this way. So once that's in here, it should look something like this. Now you can also customize the columns if you want to, but for this, we don't really need to. So we'll just hit OK. And then we get the exact same view with the 9 rep users. So another thing you might want to keep track of is sometimes, as I was saying earlier when explaining agent users, you might have some agent users that were created that are just manager users. And you'll notice we're on the reps view. So if I go back to the top left menu and I look through here and I clicked on reps, if you recall, this reps view does include managers when they are also a rep. So you might have some situations where you have a manager user that is not a rep user. They're not going to show up in this view no matter what we do. So you'll have to click this managers tab. So on this managers tab, you can also see the sign-ins here. And sometimes they'll correspond to the same as your reps login. In most cases, they will. It's very rare that you would want to create a manager user without the rep half of it. The only time I could see that being the case would be if you just wanted to give, say, a manager access to an agency, but that manager doesn't actually sell anything in terms of commission items, so you don't have to pay them commissions. You just want to give them access to see everything that their agency is selling. And that's the only time you really want to just enable just a manager user instead of both. But yeah, if you're on this manager tab, you can see all of the enabled managers in here by clicking on the sign in and sorting them. So if you had a list longer than 6, for example, you could click this twice to kind of sort it by enabled, and it'll shoot all the enables up to the top. And yeah. So you also notice there's this little transfers column here, which is just indicating that this manager user has a transfer set up under it. So if you were to disable it, the user that was getting commissions from your subscription, that you allowed them to get commissions from your subscription, will lose the ability to pull commissions from your RPM to their RPM. So just be careful when you're disabling users to check for this transfer column on yes. So yeah. So you'll also, another way to check it is to go to the top left menu and then go into commissions. And then in this view here, there's this little outgoing transfers view. If you give that a click, it might take a while to load because it's loading a lot of data, but eventually when it does load, it will allow you to see all of your agencies that have outgoing transfers from your RPM subscription to another RPM subscription, or to their RPM subscription. But yeah, that is pretty much this section of it, and we're going to jump into the next one right now. All right, on to our next topic here about transfers and their management, best practices, everything kind of transfer related. We're going to be jumping into my RPM subscription, and I'm going to show you right where I left off with the outgoing transfers view that now shows up. This is what it looks like, and you can kind of, as I was talking about enabling and disabling agents, the outgoing transfers view just shows you which of the listed agencies in your RPM subscription are enabled for transfers. And now that we know that about that list, what kind of makes an agency enabled for transfers or makes it so that it shows up on this list is very simple. It's actually all transfers need to happen in RPM is for yourself, if you're managing an RPM subscription, is if you created an agency with an enabled manager user and that enabled manager user was assigned, or that agency of that manager user, sorry, was assigned commission items at any point in a closed commission run, that would enable that agency with the enabled manager user to then be able to set up transfers between your RPM and their RPM. So yeah, that's pretty much all you need to do. So if you wanted to set up transfers for, say, a sales partner that has their own RPM subscription and they're requesting that, all you have to do is make sure, if you go to your top left menu, go into agencies, that their agency is in your RPM and you're assigning them commissions. We're assuming you're assigning them commissions. And then when you're in their agency, you would then just click on their rep or manager user. Just make sure that the sign-in is enabled. If it's not enabled, you could, for example, give them an email address here, edit their contact info, give them an email address, and then just send them a password reset. And then once they set their password, you can let them know, hey, all you need to do is to set up transfers in your RPM is make sure you remember your username and password combo. And when you go to all of the instructions to add transfers, it will ask you or ask them what the username and password is so they can fill that out and then get transfers set up. But yeah, so if you're managing your RPM subscription and you just need your sales partners to have access to transfers, all you have to do is give them a enabled manager login to their agency that has commissions assigned to them. And that is pretty much it for transfer management, or how to enable transfers at the very least. So yeah, from there, we can cover it real quick. If we go back to the top left menu, say you were an agent that you were setting up transfers, what you would do is you'd log into your RPM, then you'd go to your top left menu, you go into suppliers, and then you'd find your supplier in here, and then go to like 8x8, for example. Let's just choose one at random, go to imports and transfers, and then you'd hit add a transfer up top here. And then when you're in here, you might have one existing already. If you don't, or no matter what, if you're trying to set up a new one, you'll click this new sign-in option. You can also click this article link if you need help on refreshing yourself with the steps. But you'll click this new sign-in, and then you'll just fill in that username and password combo that you've gotten from your TSD or whoever, your sales partner that is letting you set this up. So you just fill that in there, and then you hit next. And if your combination of username and password is correct, then I'll put you onto the transfers page, and you can edit it from there. So before I jump into like the specifics of things related to setting the transfer up, I want to go back to the top left menu into agencies and then kind of go into one of my agencies here. So if we look at an agency in general, over the course of, let's say, like years or so, you might have agency management where new people come on, new people leave, or old people leave, new people come on. And the list of reps and manager kind of gets unwieldy or gets really large. And then over time, let's say, for example, this agency, I set them up 5 years ago, and then currently today they email me saying, oh, Solaire is no longer working for us. Can we add a new manager user and make them the manager for our agency? If they have RPM transfers set up between their RPM and your RPM, and you disable this manager user, what's that going to do is it's going to disable the transfers on their subscription. And when they ask you for these resets and disablements and name changes, they might not know that it's going to disable the transfers and cause a whole bunch of issues with their commissions for the month, because then all of a sudden they won't be able to transfer anything in. So to kind of avoid that, a couple best practices here is, if possible, if somebody wants to disable managed user, maybe they just want to change the name of it and give a login to somebody else. That could be an option. You could just click on the manager and name change it. This will change its name across all the references in RPM. So you do have to be careful, like with historical commissions and things like that. If you name change something, that rep, no matter what month it was in, it's going to have its name changed across all of its commission history. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you do a name change. It just straight up changes the reference across everywhere that it's referenced. If you were to click on Solaire here, for example, and then do edit, and then change his first and last name, it would change it across the board everywhere that it's mentioned. So clicking back to my agency. So another option is kind of to prevent this from happening in the future is if you were to just even add a manager user. And when you go to add managed users for agencies, it might be a good idea to just add the agency name as the first name with no spaces preferably. And then last name would be like manager. That way it's kind of a generic manager user, and to make it a rep as well if you want to, or just make it a manager. It doesn't need to be both in this scenario because it's just managing, or assuming this isn't going to be the only user in the agency, you don't need to make it a rep. But if it is, you do, because you need to assign commissions to reps. So yeah, you hit next, and let's just go manual password and leave this on disabled and hit finish. And then what we have here is now we have kind of a manager user, and in the real world, you'd want to enable it and not leave it disabled like I did. But you'd have an enabled manager user that you can just use for like transfer setups for your agents that want to do transfer setups for their RPM subscriptions. And that way, whenever a name change happens or like organizations restructure, you'll have a generic manager user that has a transfer setup under it, and that's kind of its only purpose. It can still be logged into and used as an agent login if needed, but at the very least, the name will be more generic, so it's not just one person that kind of owns the login, and it can kind of be a more generic one. So yeah, so that's kind of what happens when you disable a user. So if you disable a user, long story short, if you disable a enabled manager user with the transfer setup on it, it breaks it for the subscriber that was using that enabled manager user for transfers. And what they have to do when that happens is if you don't re-enable the same user and you say give them that new user, they'll have to reset up all of their transfers using the new username and password combination, which can be tedious and possibly best to avoid it if possible. So yeah. So after that, let's talk about what the transfer import looks like. And if I go to import data, no, we'll go into suppliers, we'll go into 8x8 again, we'll go into imports and transfers, and then we'll edit one of these transfers. So one thing about transfers in RPM is that the to supplier does not necessarily need to match the from supplier. So this is what happens when you first set up your transfer the first time. You'll see this screen after you put your username and password in. So some agents or some subscribers might be confused because it's going to just default itself to the top supplier here, because RPM kind of gives you the freedom to put the commission data from subscription into your subscription in whatever supplier you want. In this case, it's a simple match of 8x8 to 8x8, but for example, you don't have to. Somebody could want to say, instead of the to supplier being 8x8, it could be a TSD, and then they just put all of the transfers under one TSD supplier and assign commissions that way. So they have the freedom to choose where their suppliers go from your subscription to their subscription. And yeah. So from there, after doing that, they can also choose a whole bunch of these options that include their commission variables, so they can map your commission variables to whatever they have it named in their system. When they're first doing their transfer for the first time, all of your commission variables will show up at the very bottom here. So you can kind of see, or at least they can kind of see, oh, which items or which variables are they giving me in terms of extra data that might not be normally included in my commission reports and things like that. But one thing to keep in mind, the commission variables that show up in here are ones that are set up so that they're set to not staff only, so not hidden, so that agents can see them. And if they're set to staff only, then they won't show up in your transfers list for your agents. Yeah, and if that you put a note in there, so it says note for staff in this case, but it's actually when you fill in the notes for agents. And I'm going to go to the commission variable screen to show how this is set up. But once you put that note in here, your agents that are getting the transfers from you can see kind of your description for what this variable is. So this little notes box is really useful for letting your agents know, hey, this cycle month is meant to be the billing cycle month, as listed by these suppliers or listed by all of the suppliers in my subscription. You kind of give a short description so that way they know, oh, I do want that as an extra data field, or I don't want that as an extra data field. I never use that kind of thing. The notes are pretty handy here, and if they were to hit add, they would add this as their commission variable. So if I hit add here, I'll add cycle month to my list of things in here. If I can find it again, it will be right there. And yeah, I'll put this in, and then they can map cycle month to it and go from there. So we'll hit OK. And then, so yeah, that's what happens on the perspective of somebody setting up transfers for their subscription. And when you're setting transfers up to give to another RPM subscriber, you might be wondering, how do I get my custom variables there? And we're going to go over that right now. So to find it, we're going to go to the top left menu, commissions. You can also just, if you're on your imports and transfer screen, you can click commission variables from here as well. We'll take the long way around just to show you how to click through there. So top left menu, commissions, then commission variables. And then these variables, item variables, are what's going to show up when you're mapping your import matrix column headers to your RPM. So if we take a look at one of these, like install date here, for example, and we give that an edit. So to make it so that your agents can see it when they're doing their transfers from your subscription to theirs, you would set the security to not hidden. If you leave it on staff only, only you can, your team or whoever has access to your RPM as a staff user can see it. Whereas if you set the security to not hidden, then all of your agents can see it. So from there, the notes is where you'll see that little message that I was showing you earlier with the orange box. So if you fill a note in here, when your agents go to add it to their transfers, they can see the description you have for this variable. So if you wanted to, or if you had something that was a little more obscure in terms of variable name, you could give the purpose for that variable in the notes description here, that when they go to set up the transfers, they'll be able to see at a glance, oh, install date means install date from the originating order, or whatever install date means in your subscription. So if we hit OK there, that's pretty much all we need to do to set up those commission variables for that setup. So yeah, that is pretty much transfers in a nutshell, and I hope you learned something with the best practices, but we'll move on to the next topic now. All right, on to the next topic here. We're going to be talking about agent user settings. Now these are settings that you can apply to your agencies and the users in those agencies. And we're going to go over where to find those settings, what those settings can do, and kind of the nifty things about them, or gotchas about these settings. Yeah. So we'll be jumping into my RPM here, and we're going to go to the top left menu into agencies. And then it's going to be under this more menu here, and we're going to look at the settings. Now the settings located here are kind of a whole bunch of different settings, but we're going to go through these sections one at a time and kind of talk through all of them. The first ones are just the ability for your agent users to be able to edit the customer contacts that they have access to. So the customer contacts would be, say, the commission items that they get assigned every time, and then the customers that come along with that are the customers that they'd have access to. So agent users can't change any of the customers that they're not getting commissions from, but by default, this might be set to edit on your subscription. So if you don't want them changing customer contacts on you, and you just want them to, say, read it or maybe not see them at all, you can change these settings in here. So the next step or next section is rep transfer. So you could, or this refers to like account transfers. When you go into an account number, you can, or an account object in RPM, you can go and transfer it to current rep to another rep, and these are the options related to that. So by default, I believe these are all set to yes. Replace and split, remove access and transfer assignment code. These are kind of common things that you'd want to happen during a transfer, but if you don't want these to happen, there's an option to disable them. So replace and splits just means that if you were to take a account and that account was inside of a split and you transfer it to another rep, that rep would then be replaced in that split on the split itself. So instead of it being the old rep on that split, it moved to the new rep. Now, where you might not want to do that is if you had, say, an account that was just misassigned to a rep and you don't want it to replace the rep in the split, right? Because the split was set up correctly, but your account assignment wasn't, then you might want to turn this off before doing the transfer, or else you might find that after you calculate that the wrong rep is getting the split. One big warning, splits are not referrals. So if you're set up most of your things as referrals, don't worry about this at all. But if you do have it set up as your account set up in splits, then that's one thing to keep in mind. So the other option is remove access. And normally this is set to default. And all it does is when you transfer the account, the old rep no longer has access to the account. They'll still have access to it historically if they've been given, say, commission, or if they commissioned under it in the past. So if they've had like a few months before you notice that it was assigned to the wrong rep, then they're still going to have access to their commission history because RPM locks those commission runs down, right? So they don't ever change on you. So it only ever removes the access on a go forward basis. So there is not too much reason to set it to no. The only reason you might want to set it to no is if you wanted a rep to stay having access to the account no matter what. So maybe if it's just like a transfer of who the primary rep is on the account, then maybe you would not want to remove access, but you can always just add access back after the fact. So it's easier to just leave this on yes by default. Yeah, so the last one is just transfer assignment code. Now, if you're using assignment codes, you'd kind of know that they go hand in hand with the account when it comes to assignments, but there's kind of the way of transferring assignment codes is a little more tedious than transferring, say, an account from one rep to another. So if you are using assignment codes and you leave this option on yes, all it does is it'll also move the assignment code from the old rep to the new rep. And if you set it on no, then it won't do that. And really the only reason you'd want to do that, and it's pretty thin of a reason, is if you were to, say, still be using assignment codes for some imports, but not use assignment codes for another, and you want to move just the account from a rep to another rep while keeping anything that's tagged with that assignment code on the old rep. So maybe then you'd want to set it to no, but even that use case is already pretty thin. So you can kind of just leave this on yes and not worry about it until that use case comes up. So yeah, so the next section here, new agency defaults, are just the defaults that an agency enters with. So if you change any of these settings, it won't affect any of your existing agencies, but each of these settings will only affect new agencies that come in. So you can also change this for your existing agencies, and I'll show you how to do that after, but these are just the defaults that they enter or are created with. So they're add files, whether or not agencies can attach files to their agency, to your order forms or any processes that you give them access to, things like that. Start forms, same thing, whether or not they can start opportunities, start orders, or if you don't give them access to any process in your RPM, then start forms being on yes or no does not matter. They won't be able to just magically start forms. They'll still need the permission of each process to do so. So then there's also download Excel files. This one allows them to download, say, their agency summaries or download any Excel files out of their reporting capabilities that they have. So this just means that your agencies still only can download things they can see, so they can't just go download everything in your subscription. They can only download things they have access to, but this is the option that lets them do that. And then the last two kind of incoming referrals just shows you all of the different options. By default, it shows them the most details possible, so everything that can be included in the referral will show up there. And then from there, you can get more and more pared down until maybe you don't want them to see the account number, you don't want to see the product, you just want them to see, hey, this is the referral you get, this is the supplier you get it from. That's that last option for you. So yeah, so the last option is just customers, whether or not they can edit customers. It's on by default, but if you don't want them to edit like basic fields of customers or change things, you can leave it on read, and then that way they can't change anything related to customers at all. So yeah, other than there's also the new agency user defaults, which is instead of the agency itself, it's referring to the rep and manager. And this sales commission option is just whether or not they can see the commissions assigned to them. So hidden or not hidden. And I would say about 99% of the time you would want them to be able to see their own sales commission. But there could be times you want them just to have access to their orders and you don't want them to see commissions, even though you're assigning them commissions. Maybe you don't want them to see the exact numbers, so you can hide it and they can still use the agent login to enter orders or things like that. And then the very last section here, custom naming, just allows you to change what your pages are called in RPM. So if you, for example, you don't call your agencies agency, you want to call them sale partner or just partners or things like that, you can change them here and give you managers. Same thing with reps, different names or plural versions and things like that. So just a little customization option that you might not have known about. But once you change it in here, I'll change it everywhere where it references it in your RPM. So it's a good option if you want to just customize your subscription a little bit and change the naming scheme to kind of fit more of your business name for what you call agencies or what you call managers. So yeah, so that is all of these settings. So the last thing I want to show you before we go on to the next topic is if I click into one of my agencies, I can change these settings for my agencies after the fact by going into the agency and scrolling down and hitting edit on the permissions here. And then we'll be able to change the values. Say if I wanted to change it from like yes to no and that kind of thing, right? I want to no longer allow just this agency, and this only changed it for the one agency. I don't want to allow them to add files anymore. I don't want them to download, things like that. I can change the options here. And same thing with the settings for the rep and manager users. You can also edit their ability to see gross commission, or sorry, not gross commission, the ability to see sales commission or not see sales commission from this option here. And yeah, that is it for this topic. And we're moving on to our last couple, I believe. All right, moving on to our next topic about agency groups. We're going to be talking about this feature in RPM, some use cases about it, and then some of its ins and outs. So jumping right into my RPM subscription here, we're going to be going to the top left menu. We're going to be going to agencies, and you can kind of find this feature located in this more menu here under groups. When I give that a click, it'll list out all of my existing groups. So kind of before I go any further, I'm going to be describing what an agency group is. So an agency group allows you to kind of combine a assortment of agencies or a number of agencies into a group pretty much, and you can put as many agencies into a single group as you want, but an agency can only belong to at a time. And the reason you'd want to put a bunch of agencies into a group is so you can kind of group them together, like here, for example, where I have it all in channel manager 1, and then I can give any of the agency managers in that group what we call full group access. And what that will allow you to do is then have this manager here see all of the commissions inside of this group from all three of the agencies. So kind of a use case for this would be kind of think of it as maybe a way to combine agencies under like a sales manager. So if, say you had a regional manager that was kind of in charge of 10 agencies, you could group all 10 of those agencies into one group, give that manager user full group access, and then they can see all of the commissions under all 10 of those agencies and kind of manage it from there. Okay, this one's bringing in this much, that kind of thing. Another use case would be, say, for like acquisitions or mergers, you want to just combine all of those agencies that were purchased by a larger agency or entity and kind of give them full access to view all of those commission under each of those agencies while not changing too much about how you reassign commissions, or having to worry about moving all of the accounts or payouts over to another agency because of acquisitions and mergers like that. So you can kind of use it to group multiple agencies together for the purpose of reporting or for the purpose of allowing your agent manager logins to be able to see it on their end and set it up. So some like immediate things that might jump out at you with those questions are things like how do transfers work in this instance. Full group access does not give this user or any enabled manager user with full group access does not give them access to set up transfers for all three of these agencies. You'll still need three separate enabled manager logins to set up three separate transfers. So if you run into that situation, that's kind of the answer to that is, yeah, they can see all of the commissions, but they'll still need to set up three separate transfers for each of the agencies, or separate transfers for each of the agencies that they'll have. So if any of those use cases sound interesting to you, or you have some other use cases that you feel like it was close to my explanation but wasn't quite a fit, just feel free to reach out to me and we can talk it through and see if we can make it work. So yeah, back to the agency groups feature. So to kind of make use of it, you would first create an agency group. If I hit this here, I can just call this new group. And that is as simple as that. It creates the new agency group here. And then from there, if we click the up arrow, go back to our list of agencies, we go into any one of these agencies and we hit edit under info here. We can change the group on the very top right and switch it to that new group and then hit OK, and that's it. So an agency can only belong to one group, and the group that shows up that it belongs to shows up here. Now let's say if I want to put another agency in there, I can go edit and switch another agency, and now I have two agencies in my group. And what that allows me to do is if I go back up here and go back to, let's say, my example, and we'll go into this manager user, and I can go and edit this manager user, and they'll need to have an enabled login, but so let's just pretend they're enabled now. And we'll go into this commission section here, we'll edit the access, and we'll click on full group access. We'll switch this to yes. So there's this little warning here. They'll just tell you, hey, full group access gives this manager access to all the agencies in the group like they are a manager in each one. So that gives them full access to commissions, process forms, anything that those agencies can see, this manager user will now be able to see as well. And after that, we just hit OK, and that will give them full group access. So the next time this manager user logs in, they'll be able to see all of the commissions for everything in their group, all the forms and everything like that. So if you did want to set this up yourself, but you're a little skeptical, or not skeptical, sorry, a little worried maybe, or apprehensive about setting up the user and giving them too much access, you could create a test agency, for example. And with this test agency, you can just make a manager user for the test agency and then put all those agencies in a group and then give your test agency manager user full group access, so you can test the login yourself, see what you can see, and see if it makes sense to enable that for your use case. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for the agency groups feature. It's a pretty broad kind of, or not broad, maybe more of a narrow use case, but if you do have a use case for it, it is quite nifty. And yeah, if you have anything that's kind of close but doesn't quite fit, I'd love to hear about it and see if we can find a way to make it work. But yeah, on to our last topic. All right, on to our last topic for the day. We're going to be talking about agency assignments. Now, this is a process-based feature. It's entirely based around your agents logging in and using your orders, your opportunities, and this feature kind of just facilitates the ability to assign certain staff members on your team to handle certain things that come in via, say, let's say if a agent was to create like a commission inquiry, you'd want that to go to your commission inquiry team. You wanted your order came in and you want the orders team to get those tickets or get those forms, that kind of thing. So yeah, jumping into my RPM here, I'll be showing you where this feature is located. It is at the very top left here under agencies. And then again, under the more menu, we're going to go into assignments here. Now these categories are kind of, you want to name them based off of what section or process, I should say, that your team kind of revolves around, because this will make a lot more sense a little bit later, but just to show you, this is where you add categories, and you can even do imports. So if you wanted to say add a category and then do a mass import to assign a staff user to all of those categories, you do so through here. But jumping back out of here, back into an agency page, we can go into one of my agencies, and then those assignments show up in this box right here called staff. Now your staff users are assigned through here. If you did it via import, you can do it that way. If you want to manually assign it, you can do so through here. So let's say orders goes to this staff user, and support teams goes to like RPM support, for example. Yeah, we hit OK. And then now what that does is if we go back to the top left menu into setup, and we go into my orders process, and then go into workflow, and scroll all the way down to the form owner section at the bottom here. So you'll notice if I edit this, the started by agency user will then have the staff assigned as, and this is where those categories come in. You'll notice I kind of added cat and dog to highlight that. Those are the categories that show up in here. A little more identifiable other than if I just put orders or support team in there. I kind of mix it up. But yeah, so those staff assignment categories that we added, this is where they show up. So you'll remember when I went to my agency and I added a staff user to say the orders category, whenever a new form is started by an agency user, the staff that gets assigned to it is whoever I selected on my agency. So you can do it, you can select a different staff user per agency. So if you had, say, managers or something like that that would handle things from these agencies, this is how you'd kind of segment those forms that they create or commission inquiries that they create. You do it this way. So you can also go like, oh, if the staff assigned is this, but if it's empty, we can do it so it always defaults to this staff user, or that kind of thing. So yeah, that's pretty much the staff assignment feature. I hope this was new and exciting, but if you don't have a use case for it, or if you have any other questions related to it, please feel free to reach out to me at support@rpmtelco.com. And that wraps it up for our webinar. And yeah, I hope this was an exciting webinar. And if anyone has any questions or concerns, you know where to reach me. Thank you.